All right, let's jump right in. The JonBenet Ramsey case. I mean, for decades, it's just been this tangled web of clues, theories, you name it. But look, we're not here to try and solve the crime. That's not the point of this. What we are going to do is try to understand something much deeper, the complex human behavior that can actually make a case, well, unsolvable. We're going to take a hard look at the psychology of a family in the absolute worst crisis imaginable and see how their response ended up shaping, well, everything. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. This is a truly staggering statement from John Ramsey. He is literally putting the Boulder Police Department's actions on almost the same level of cruelty as what was done to his own daughter. This isn't just a simple complaint, you know? This is something else entirely. It's like the first brick in a psychological fortress, and honestly, it gets right to the heart of the central puzzle of this whole thing.
So yeah, that's really the big question we're tackling here. We're going to set aside the physical evidence for a moment, and instead we're going to focus on this total breakdown of trust. How on earth does a grieving family get to a place where they see the police, not as helpers, not as allies, but as enemies, almost as bad as the person who took their child? How does that happen?
Okay, so let's start unpacking this. To even begin to answer that question, we have to look at what you could call the linguistic architecture the Ramseys built. Basically, a fortress made of words. And this started right from the get-go. This was never just about saying we're innocent. No, it was a much more deliberate strategy to completely control the story, to frame their reality, and to draw a very clear line in the sand between who was for them and who was against them.
In this defensive posture, this fortress, it wasn't random at all. It was constructed very carefully by pointing to two very specific, very clear external threats. By creating these enemies, they essentially gave themselves a reason for their lack of cooperation. It allowed them to frame their actions, not as, getting in the way of the investigation, but as something they had to do, as simple self-preservation.
And you can see it laid out so clearly here. This is the narrative they built. It's basically a war on two fronts. On one side, you've got the Boulder police, who they accused of being out to lynchers, treating them like hunted suspects. And then on the other side, you have the media. John Ramsey called them piranhas, a horrible cancer just profiting from their pain. This idea of a two-front war, it became the justification for pretty much everything they did from that point on.
So, the question is, how did this whole fortress of words even get started? Believe it or not, you can trace this entire spiral of mistrust back to one single moment, a seemingly tiny, insignificant exchange that happened in the first few hours. But this one moment, it tells you everything you need to know about the dynamic that would go on to poison this case forever.
So, try to put yourself there for a second. It's the morning of December 26th. The house is pure chaos. You've got Officer Rick French, and he's just trying to do his job, trying to get the basic facts straight. And he asks John Ramsey a completely standard, by-the-book question, the kind of question you ask in any missing person case. Now, you have to understand, this is purely procedural. It is just a box an investigator has to check. You have to rule out the simplest explanations first, even if they seem totally ridiculous at the time. It wasn't an accusation, it wasn't a judgment, it was just process.
But of course, that is not how John Ramsey heard it. The reply is just sharp, dismissive. He sounds offended, and in that one exchange, a routine procedural question gets twisted into an insult to his intelligence, like the officer lacks basic common sense. And boom, right there. That's the first tiny crack in the foundation of trust between the family and the police.
Okay, and this is where we really need to pivot. Because just recounting what happened, well, that's the easy part. To really get what's going on here, we have to dig deeper and analyze the human drivers behind these actions. You gotta ask why. Why did a totally standard question set off such a defensive bomb? Why did communication just completely collapse, and so incredibly fast?
So to really understand that one critical moment, we can't just look at it on the surface. We need to break it down and look at it through a few different lenses. We're going to unpack the physiology, the psychology, and yeah, even the philosophy of what was going on in that room.
All right, first up, let's talk biology, the physiological lens. When you're under that kind of extreme stress, your brain is just flooded with cortisol. It's the fight or flight response. And what happens is the rational part of your brain, the part that makes calm decisions, it basically just shuts down. It goes offline. John even said it himself, that at times they could barely hold a conversation. That's not him being dramatic, that's a literal neurobiological fact of trauma. So to a nervous system that's on fire, a calm, procedural question can feel like an attack.
Okay, next let's look at it psychologically. There's this fascinating concept called cognitive narrowing.
Think of it like this. When you're terrified, your mind gets tunnel vision. It locks onto one version of reality and rejects everything else. So for John Ramsey, his reality was, my daughter has been kidnapped. That's it. So any question that didn't fit neatly into that box, a question like, did she run away? It wasn't just seen as irrelevant. It felt like someone was actively getting in the way.
And this right here, this is where you see the core conflict just laid bare. It's a head-on collision between two completely different and totally incompatible ways of seeing the world. You have the parental framework, right? It runs on emotion and certainty. John knows his daughter. Then you have the investigative framework, which has to be systematic. It has to look at every single possibility. Then you throw in a culture clash. Here's a powerful CEO who's used to people listening to him, and suddenly he's being treated like any other suspect. It all leads to this impossible paradox. Acting like a protective parent can look exactly the same as acting guilty.
So here's the really crucial takeaway. That first crack, that one misunderstood question, it wasn't a one-off thing. No, it was the very first domino to fall. It kicked off this vicious, self-feeding cycle of mistrust that ultimately made any real cooperation completely impossible.
I mean, just look at how this toxic feedback loop plays out. It's almost predictable. Step 1. A routine question is taken as an insult. Step 2. That defensive response is seen by the cop as hostility. Step 3. The cop gets more suspicious, more formal. Step 4. That formality is seen by the family as proof the cop is against them, so they dig their heels in even more. You see? Each side's actions just confirm the other's worst fears. It's a downward spiral that ends in a total communication breakdown. The whole investigation was poisoned from the inside.
And this, really, is the central, haunting puzzle of this whole case. Here's the impossible problem. The things you do to cope with unimaginable trauma when you're innocent can look exactly like the things you do to manage guilt. Think about it. Controlling information, hiring lawyers, pushing back against the police. Someone who's guilty would do that, and someone who's innocent and terrified might do the exact same thing. So, how in the world are you supposed to tell the difference? From the outside looking in, it's almost impossible.
So where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us with a really profound question. The challenge in a case like this isn't just about looking at evidence under a microscope. It's about trying to understand how people build an entirely new reality for themselves, a story just to survive something that feels unsurvivable. That architecture of denial they built, the one with the clear good guys and bad guys, it filled a very deep, very powerful psychological need, whatever the actual truth of the matter was. So maybe the ultimate question isn't just what happened that night. Maybe it's, what does the story they built tell us about them? And what does it tell us about the human mind when it's pushed to its absolute limit?